The comments heard on The View from a Pew are those of Mac McCoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here is today's The View from a Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View from a Pew.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are recording this on the 21st day of August in the Lord's year 2025, and we thank you for joining us. This is one of the programs that we record here on the platform of Webcast One Live. This program is The View from a Pew, and as in many cases, I have a regular co-host or guest, however you want to say it. And Steve Arts is in the building today. And one of the things I like about Steve is I let him pick the topics, and he's very good at researching the topics. And today's topic, I personally get a big kick out of. This is a topic that I've worked on for many, many, many years. And it's basically, the conversation goes like this. Atheism. Is it real or not? Now, tell me a little bit more about how you were thinking about this topic of conversation.
Well, atheism, brings a lot of things to mind. I think we have to look at it in a little bit bigger spectrum. For example, from what I understand, the definition is believing in no God. But at the same time, agnostics believe in non-existence of God as being unknowable, and a nihilist thinks the traditional values and beliefs are unfounded, existence is senseless and useless. So what it all seems to be is kind of a denial of objective truth and of moral truths in particular.
Okay, now I have to be honest with you. The first time I got this and I read it, I had never heard of the term nihilism before.
Oh, that's a big deal. It's especially true in science because it basically wipes out everything. Now, one of the things that gets into mind here is that one of the atheist popular or famous ones is Yuval Noah Harari, and he demonstrates by how he talks about this that the only consistent atheist is a nihilist. So that's where it comes into.
Okay.
It's supportive of atheism because really you can't be consistent as an atheist. You have to go about it from another perspective, and a nihilist is what supports it.
All right. So an atheist or atheism is a lack of belief in the existence of any gods with a small g.
Correct.
All right. So now this is kind of a trick question. Then if there are no gods, what is the person who decided there are no gods? Who's their God?
Well, we're way ahead of ourselves, I think.
Oh, we are?
Yes, but let me answer it as a summary versus a rational explanation.
Well, if you want to save the big ending, you
No, this isn't really
okay.
A nihilist, agnostic, atheist. Really, their God is themselves.
Very good.
And
very good. Good job.
The nature of the reason that's important to understand is that if one believes that anything that points you away from God is evil, then this has to be classified under that, in the sense that if you try to void out everything as though there is nothing, by the nature of human nature being we're flawed and we're human and we have a sinful nature, we will by their very nature gravitate to evil without us exercising our free will. So as a result of that, if you try to void out everything and create a vacuum, which is basically what atheism does, you will suck that in. So you can't avoid some evil in the process. Because evil will automatically come into the human condition if left unchecked.
But does an atheist believe in evil?
Well, I don't know if he believes in it, but he speaks a nihilist, and they speak against any moral truth. So if you point against a moral truth, aren't you pointing against God?
Yes.
So it by definition, or by knowing one's actions as much or more than words, it automatically goes there.
Yeah, and just so you know, we may continue this conversation on another date, probably next week. And if we do, I'd like to find an atheist to come on with us. Not to judge them or ridicule them, but to get their perspective of who they are. And I don't know if that. I know someone who is that, so we could get him on the phone if we wanted to. It's probably the most, and I'm going to make a positive term here because I could make a negative. He's the most convincing atheist that I've ever known, and I've known him for a long time. He believes in atheism, and he also gets, how do I say this? One time I said to him, I'm going to pray for you. And he got mad at me. And we're friends for a long time. Don't you pray for me. I don't want to be prayed for. Well, what does that tell me about that fear that he has in not being prayed for?
You remember in the Bible who said that? Remember when Satan was, Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, and the devil, Satan, came up to him and he said, now, if you do this, do that. And Jesus offered, he said something about forgiveness or something. And he said, I don't want your forgiveness.
Yes.
Think of that.
I do remember
that. Now you think about that. You think, how could nobody, because I am God. That's the attitude. Now, yeah. I don't know your friend, but when you think about it that way, it's kind of reflective of that. I mean, it makes one wonder where his head's at, because most people wouldn't mind a little bit of prayer. Most people wouldn't mind a little forgiveness. So when you think of it, and by the way, speaking of that, the atheist category is a very small number. That's really important to understand. Yeah. I mean, truly. Now, and it's also a floating number. It's what I mean by that is there's a lot of famous atheists that float, because one day they are, one day they're not. I'm talking about movie stars, the Brad Pitts, the Angelina Jolies, all these. There's so many of those guys out there that one day there are, and then they'll say, well, I believe in something like this now, and it's just, I think it's almost like it's to get notoriety. It's almost like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's to get attention.
It's to get attention. And usually if you want to say something, or if you want attention, the more outrageous you can make the comment, the more attention you'll get.
Well, that's a real interesting topic, Steve. Steve Arts is my co-host today on The View from a Pew, and we're talking about atheism. Is a whole lot about nothing. That was the title that Steve gave this. So say again what you just said.
About movie stars? About what? Which part?
The last part you talked about. Okay, I'll do it. You said that people go back and forth on atheism.
Yes.
Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't. Well, how can that be? Doesn't that mean then they're agnostic?
Well, I had a list of these people that are avowed atheists, and I started researching each one. I went somewhere to get a list.
Yeah.
And then I started looking up each one, and I found, not today, or not exactly, or they were, but not now. And one in particular came to mind that it caught my attention. It was Morgan Freeman. And I thought, that doesn't sound right. Well, he's not exactly, he's not running the mill either, but nevertheless. So the point, but I noticed that most of these people that fluctuate are people that are in the movie entertainment industry. And so where you find the hardcore atheist and related labels or in the sciences, in the teaching profession, professionals, intellectuals, not so much in the movie industry. So what we are exposed to in the popular culture isn't where you find the hardcore atheist that can actually do an argument that has any substance.
Right. Yeah, because their argument is really, and I'm not being critical of them, but the answer to their argument is nothing.
Well, I did some research. I asked Chat GPT what it
Oh,
thought.
no.
Oh yeah. And
Not
Chat,
AI.
oh yes, but you may be surprised because Chat GPT very clearly says that God exists.
Okay.
Now, why would that be? Well, if you're rational about it, if you're logical about it, and you know, one thing you got to look at is these chats and such where you apply AI, it does tend to apply logic. It does tend to apply rationale. Now, if you take the argument from contingency, do you know what that is, Max?
I want you to explain to me your definition of yeah.
I just wanted you to admit you didn't know everything. That's all I wanted to get from that. So that, no, most people would not have heard of this, but it's something really important to understand. The argument from contingency is one of the best to prove the existence of God. Now, the argument from contingency starts with the idea that everything in the universe is either a necessary being or a contingent being. What that means is, since something, in other words, must depend on something else for its existence. And you can just tie that together like a chain. The problem is that unless you have a necessary being in addition to all the contingent beings, then there can be no cause or explanation for the existence of all the contingent beings. And that is ultimately where God comes into play. You cannot avoid that.
Okay, I want to reread what you just read because I've got it in front of me. Since not everything can be contingent, which means dependent on something else for its existence, there must be a necessary being, a being that exists by its own nature, not because of something else, that is the ultimate cause or explanation for the existence of all contingent beings. Now, you're going to have to be careful when you read that. And by the way, this document that Stephen made up, I'll be glad to send it to you. Just send me an email at mac@mckoy.net, mac@mccoy.net, and I will get you a copy of this. Because this is not written as if, though, it's not written as if Stephen's talking to a 6-year-old, which is about my level of understanding. And I know you hear that as self-deprecating, but I really mean it in a way. I think if you explain something to somebody as if they were very young and didn't know all the ins and outs of language, then I think it's easy for other people, including myself, to understand what you're trying to explain. Think about an 8-year-old sitting on grandma's lap, and the 8-year-old says, well, is there a God, Grandma? Grandma's not going to go into in-depth theology. She's going to say something to that child which will make sense to her. And I'm okay being that kind of child. So when you talk about argument for contingency, tell me if I'm saying this right. Okay, I'm talking like an 8-year-old now. That something had to create everything around us. And if you don't believe that somebody or something created all that is about us, then you're a contingent being, or did I get it the opposite?
The contingents are not the one that initiates it. They're the ones that exist on somebody else. So
So they are not atheists.
The necessary being is what would create something to start this ball rolling, so to
Okay.
say. So let's make it. Let's just go into like a Darwin. In a Darwinism, his logic sounds reasonable, except you have to start with something. So if you start with a big bang or whatever, something has to cause that. And that's where it really an easier way to say this maybe is argument from contingency is based on reality. If you look at objective reality, it's impossible for atheists to consistently live within the confines of their own professed worldview. You can't, they have to fight literally against every built-in instinct to imbue reality with a higher purpose. What I'm trying to get at is that all the atheists will talk about causes, but they will avoid purpose, because purpose cannot exist without some higher being behind it. It says, what would mean that it would be the definition of purpose has meaning. Well, it's meaningless for an atheist. Their meaning doesn't have much. There is no purpose for meaning.
Would it also be the lack of morals?
Well, it usually is. However, you can argue, and there are atheists that will argue moral good. I had exposure to one that was online, and I saw that, and I actually thought that was quite good. It made me really realize that morality can and does exist outside of religion. And so therefore, you can argue that a person can be a good person, do good things, without necessarily being a Christian or believing in a higher power per se. However, they have to be intentional about that, which by definition, again, leads one to believe that he must be trying to do something beyond himself. So you could perhaps argue agnosticism, but perhaps not atheism.
Steve Arts is my co-host today as we continue down theological topics. And many of this is too deep for me. And what I like about having Steve on the program is he does his research, and therefore he can explain some of the things that I don't understand. Now, we talked earlier in a segment, earlier in the show, that someone who is an atheist, it would be correct for us to say that he or she is their own God.
I think so, only from the from the logic that there's nothing left. In other words, if you deny everything, he cannot deny himself, or he would not exist. So as a result, all he's left with is that. Now, that's different than an agnostic, who he believes that there's a non-existence of a God, or he's unknowable. It's almost like he hasn't found God yet. He might be looking, but he says, I have no proof that God is here, but he doesn't deny God. Okay? Atheists deny the existence of God. A God doesn't exist, point blank. Agnostics say, well, I haven't found him yet. A nihilist, and I'm going through this for a reason, they are basically saying that beliefs are unfounded and existence is senseless and useless. And so therefore, why, we just are just here and we just follow our instincts. And now I'm going to touch on something else here. Who are some famous atheists? Some of these people you might know. Bertrand Russell, Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, Charles Darwin. These are solid atheists, meaning they don't fluctuate. They hadn't fluctuated. They're not that many, are there? There's a few others. But all the many that you claim they're atheists, they have no idea what they are. They're just unfounded at this point. I say that only because don't let atheism overwhelm you. I mean, like, it's not that big a deal, except to the person that tries to make it a big deal, because there's nothing of substance there to talk about.
Steve, would you say that atheism is a religion?
No, it might be a philosophy, but if you want to consider religion another philosophy, one could consider that. In my opinion, I don't know what you would consider it. It's a belief.
Okay, so let me walk you down a trail.
And in fact, I'd go one step further. Instead of a belief, it's almost a non-belief, if you will, because it believes in nothing.
Yeah. Oh no, I know you're making sense, but it still makes me scratch my head.
Well, it should make you scratch your head because, quite frankly, that's the whole point of the subject. It doesn't make sense. And so, if it doesn't leave you scratching your head, then you must be thinking, or not picking on you, but anybody would have to think like an atheist. You you can't think that way because your conclusions would never come out that way.
Okay. Here's a theory that I float. I'm not saying I believe in this, but I believe it's possible. In fact, I strongly believe it's possible that atheism. All right, I'm gonna back up for a second. I believe that God creates us perfectly, and then Satan walks in and messes everything up. And so you have two things out there in the world. You have folks that follow God to the best they can, and then you have everything else. And I don't believe, myself personally, I don't believe in free will. Now, I know that you have a choice of which way to go, but you're not choosing your way. You're either choosing God's or everything else.
But I do believe in free will strongly, and one has a choice to follow God or not.
Yeah, but see, that's the only two choices. A lot of people, when you get into this conversation on free will, and I go back to the cartoon that we grew up, Tom and Jerry. So Tom is chasing Jerry all over the place. Jerry's the little mouse, and Tom's the tomcat. And every once in a while, when Tom's trying to figure out what to do, he's got an angel that appears on one shoulder and a devil on the other. Well, if he's trying to make a decision, why would you not choose following God?
Well, that's
Because you don't believe in him.
Well, or you believe more in yourself. It's a matter of pride. Let me back up one thing about this might help to answer that question. I mentioned earlier about what reality is. So just a thought here. Either reality itself is an illusion or the atheistic worldview is. Okay? There's one or the other. Reality is an illusion or the atheistic world. Why I say that is it's incoherent. Back to your scratching your head.
Okay.
It's incoherent. It's impossible to come to a rational solution with atheism. It's an inherent contradiction because we were made in the image of God to express our choice to follow him or not, and to think otherwise doesn't lead anywhere.
Well, yeah, because if I ask an atheist, okay, in the Bible, and of course, the minute you mention the Bible, the atheist goes crazy. But in the Bible, it says God made us in his own image. So if you don't believe in God, whose image were you made in?
Correct. And now you're getting back to evil. What is evil? Well,
evil is the absence of God.
Exactly. And so if you think, we see all these pictures of what Satan must look like, and if you think of anything good being rejected, well, you'd end up with something radically different, wouldn't you? Imagine anything that's good for you is now rejected. I mean, when you start to be distorted, when you start to be something different, it's hard to even imagine.
Okay, and that brings me up to my my question. It's more than a question. I guess it's a theological. Well, this is my theology on atheism. I guess I have to say it that way. And the reason the term theology is in there because God is a part of it. So if God created us all perfect, nobody's going to die, nobody's going to get cancer, nobody's going to be sad, nobody's going to lie, cheat, or steal, because everything we do and we are made of is about God, because there was no other choice when he created us. Then Satan came into the picture and we picked up sinful nature. And most people there, no, not most people, some people right there would give me that look like my dog gives me, oh, I don't understand. If it's not sinful nature, then you're going to call it free will. But free from what? Free from God. Does that get anywhere with you? Does that make sense? I mean, when you're choosing free will, you are trying to decide between God and everything else.
Well, because of our sinful nature, we are tempted.
Sinful nature.
Yeah. If we didn't have a sinful nature, temptation really wouldn't exist.
Correct.
I mean, so maybe that's an easier way to look at this. So free will operates within that confines. So here we are. We're tempted. We're tempted to see something as good for us at the time. It's usually short-sighted. It's immediate. And we think that's the best choice for us. And then after we make those choices, we oftentimes feel remorse, guilt, and various things because of our conscience. And we say, well, we thought it was a good idea. That doesn't mean we can't make that mistake again because we seek pleasure. That's part of our sinful nature. And doesn't mean that God gives up on us, but it is the nature of that's who we are. And we have to be honest for ourselves to recognize that we can't be holier than thou without having temptation along the way.
Steve Arts is my guest today, and we are talking about atheism. And we're keeping it above the fray. We're not interested in bashing them. We're more trying to figure out where they're coming from. Now, if the absence of God, there's only one thing opposite of God, and that's evil or things you shouldn't do. Here's the road I'm running down, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Because of sinful nature, we have a hole in us, which is our insecure, fear of, and sinful nature place. And I don't know if that's true or not, but walk with me for a second on this. So if we don't fill that God hole, that place that God created for us in his through the Holy Spirit, then is that, and here's the operative phrase, is that a mental illness?
Good question. You know, the difference between, mental illness and immoral behavior sometimes is very close, I think. But no, I don't think that has to do with mental illness. I think that the emptiness that is felt is the absence of God in our lives. And I think that if one would keep choosing to fill that void with evil things, useless things in most cases, but fleeting things, and then make that a pattern of behavior, and then become so imbued with that he makes only evil choices that harm others and himself, we know we could call that evil. And if evil taken to the extreme causes mental illness, so be it. But I think mental illness as a subject is a separate issue entirely.
Okay, I'll walk with you there. So what I heard you say is that mental illness comes from the absence of God.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we may look at it if you choose evil. If a person is so imbued with evil, we might think the only explanation for that is mental illness. And I would stand to say no. It may look that way because certainly a rational person wouldn't choose to do all this bad stuff, but an evil person would.
Okay. I'm going to step out of our box and into the box of 2025 in America. Somebody comes out and takes a weapon and kills 1 or 2 or 20 or 30. They immediately say, well, he was mentally ill. He should have never had the right to have a gun. In fact, if you're a minor, they'll blame the parents on letting that person who is obviously mentally ill, not what I'm saying society says this, obviously mental ill, they can blame the parents for the actions of that child in a mass killing or anything like that.
Now, I want to back up. You said something just kind of like earlier when we were talking about Chat GPT. Well, what are they going to say? But then you said society says. Now, society or culture, just because society says something doesn't mean that's true. So the idea, in fact, I'd really suspicion right off the bat. So the news media comes out and says he's mentally ill, or somebody says somebody comes up with this. So what? Is that true? God knows. Only God knows. I don't know. They don't know. Now you could run through all kind of tests, and that's all well and good. It would, to a rational human being, doing that thing, that type of behavior, looks like a madman.
Yes.
But whether he's a madman or evil, God will judge that, not us.
But we have to live with it.
We have to live with it just like we do with prisons. So do we put people in prison? Do we not? To me, it's a matter of society self-defense. So can we rehabilitate somebody that may be mentally ill or may not be? That's why we have so many lawyers. It's not, and I mean,
So lawyers are a creation of mental illness.
Well, what you call 30,000 lawyers at the bottom of the sea.
A good start.
A good start. And so and I have good friends that are attorneys and such, and they serve a very good purpose. And it is a very challenging profession. And I might say to do it right, to do it in a ethical and moral way requires a very disciplined person, because the temptations, let me put it this way, the more power one has, the greater the temptation to misuse it. Because man, by his very definition, cannot handle power well. Look at every man that's tried to play God on earth, and you have full testament of that in full display. And we don't have to go, there's a lot of people besides Hitler. But the mental illness is really, I think in terms of discussion purposes, with atheism and evil as such, I think that's a separate thing entirely. I personally, you would think that wouldn't Satan be mentally ill? How could he have chosen to reject the very person that made him and said he's going to be God over him? To me, maybe the definition of mentally ill is wrong. Maybe we could rephrase it. Anybody thinks they're God is mentally ill.
Well, aren't we saying that the lack of God in someone's life creates mental illness?
Well, I think we could say the lack of God in one's life could drive one crazy.
Okay.
Now, I'm not totally saying he's mentally ill, but I'm saying he could be irrational.
Okay. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining myself. Let me back up. God created us perfect. No mistakes, no sin, no failure, nothing. Satan comes along and says, oh, you don't have to follow God. God didn't mean that, to not eat that fruit from that tree. Go ahead and do it. And the choice is made to do it. So if you choose to do something that's not of God, when God created us to be perfect, isn't that imperfection mental illness?
For example, if you have a schizophrenic, my degree's in psychology, so But if you have a schizophrenic person, which, by the way, schizophrenic is a label that's used for something that nobody really knows what it is, to
Okay.
be honest with you. I think most people would agree with that. But anyway, a schizophrenic is definitely a mental illness. Now, if you have a psychopath, he's been diagnosed as a psychopath, it certainly can be called a behavior or a personality disorder for sure. But is he mentally ill? He's done a lot of bad stuff. He's been very rational. Schizophrenic isn't oftentimes not very rational. I mean, he's not in control and da-da-da. But the psychopath, he can be in total control. He can plan things for years.
Okay.
And he can do a tremendous amount of damage killing people because he has no feelings, remorse. So sometimes I do believe that there are birth defects. And I do think that some people are born with mental illness.
Okay.
It might take you off your game, but I mean, that's, I have to be inclusive on this. In other words, we can't just classify by evil being mentally ill, and it's
Well,
not that way.
But I'm making a theological argument that if you do not choose to follow God in either every instance or some instances, so I've gone from every to one,
Mm-hmm.
then you are not following God at all because you're choosing to do something that Satan taught you, and Satan has a mental illness.
I can't say that. That's something I'm not qualified to say.
Well, but what else would he have?
Well, we're playing God to say. We can't.
No, but we're talking about Satan here. We can play God when it's talking about Satan,
Well, you
can't
can.
we? I mean,
You can choose to. But I don't know the answer. I do not think. I think if we believe in free will and that what the Bible says is true, that there was a battle, and Satan certainly wanted to have his own kingdom. And according to some people, this was the first time that somebody did accomplish that. With God, he got his own kingdom. God, I don't think I'd want to be in it, but anyway, so he ends up with his own kingdom, and he's divided. And if you think of if mental illness is somebody that's divided against himself, in other words,
no, he's divided against God.
well, but God, he was made by God. He's really working. That's what's so stupid about it, because he's really denying his own self. He's trying to say he really isn't choosing anything other than he's rejecting God.
Yeah,
So,
he's choosing to reject God.
right, because he wants to be his own God.
Yeah, he doesn't like God speaking in his ear. You can't say that. You can't do that. You can't do that to another person. You can't lie, cheat, or steal. I mean, out there up here on the wall, there's the 10 Commandments. And if you look at those 10 Commandments, 4 of them are about the relationship you have with God, and the other 6 are the relationship you have with other people.
Yeah. Now, in addition, a lot of angels supposedly followed Satan. So then the question becomes too, could they all just be born that way, or did they choose to be that way? And I think it was demonstrated they chose, back to free will. And so therefore, mental illness can't be just inborn in all cases if that's what we're defining as moral illness. But I think, mental illness, I think I would just want to focus on evil for its own sake versus mental illness, because I think they're two separate things. Could they be joined at the hip? Possibly.
Okay, so you're talking science. So let's play science on that. If it's not mental illness, if choosing to do something wrong is not mental illness, then it's sinful nature.
Correct.
Okay. And isn't sinful nature choosing something other than God, the way you were created?
It's sinful nature is looking what appears to be best for me at the time.
Leaving God out of the conversation.
Right. Say you're in temptation. We all have been there. And so when you're in temptation, do you say, God, help me? Or do you try to figure out how to do that and enjoy it? The point is that if you exclude God, you're giving in to sinful nature, right?
Yes.
So when Eve chose that apple to eat, she was thinking, we could say she was really hungry and that apple looked better than all the others. That's a possibility. But it probably wasn't the case since we know there was a lot of them.
Well, and she
And
would have been hungry.
and and also it was the only tree in the whole place not to mess with. But she was told basically that she would be like God if she took it.
And,
That's what Satan said.
but okay, maybe we need to end this conversation because you keep taking me back to my point, which is if God's not in the picture, then you have mental illness because God created for himself to be in the picture all the time with you. And if you're choosing not to do that, what else would it be other than mental illness?
You could say it's character disorder. You could play. You could go to all kind of labels.
But
my
that's
point.
all mental illness.
Um,
If you're not doing what God told you to do, and you're choosing sin, the only people who choose sin, I'm one of them, we're all one of them, are people who want to not listen to what God says. If God created you perfect and a hole inside you to be filled by him, and you're not choosing that, are you just an idiot or stupid? Are you ignorant?
well, I think those labels would not ignorant, but I would say stupid, idiot would apply. Mental illness, if you want to try to label it from a theological point of view, but mental illness up to this point has been labeled from man's point of view. Okay.
Yeah.
So to take that concept and try to apply it when it's a man's concept, I think is inappropriate. I don't think it applies. We can redefine it if you wish, but I don't think we can take mental illness and just push it over to from the secular side to the human side or to the theological side. I think they're two separate things.
I want to read you an article that a friend of mine, Dennis Crawford, who does the Point Counterpoint, sent this to me. And the source is CNN, and I always look at the source. And in this case, CNN took the opposite side of an issue that they would normally take. And they saw that non-believers every once in a while will have an encounter with God. I say that God reveals himself to them. And most of the time, when God wants to get your attention, you if you deny that, I'm going back to that word. If you can't see that God's trying to get your attention, there's something wrong with you. Right?
No.
Okay.
No.
Right.
That you don't. Miracles occur all the time. Some acknowledge them, some don't. So I would say simply that there's a lack of faith. Now, when Paul was knocked off his horse, you think, well, but God knew his heart. And his heart was trying to seek God. God knew that. So some people are trying to seek God, some aren't. And nothing in the world, you would say, let's play this out. So let's just take this as an example. People will say, well, hey, if God was here today, Jesus was here today and doing the miracles in front of me, I would believe. Now, come on. Would that make any difference at all? The answer is no. It wouldn't. Why? Some people choose not to accept.
I'm Mac McCoy, and this program is called The View from a Pew. We have just a few minutes left. We may come back to this topic in the future, but I do want to read you a little bit of this article. An atheist began caring for the dying. What he saw changed his view of faith and the aftermath. So here's the story. Scott Jansen's heart was racing. He took shallow breaths. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, but he tried to hide the shock. It was a crisp autumn day, and Jansen was visiting Buddy, an elderly client, at his small brick home on the dead end street of Durham, North Carolina. This is a true story. Buddy had just lost his wife of 40 years. She had been bedridden and had suffered from Alzheimer's disease. Jansen, a hospice social worker, so trained in how to care for those that are leaving this world, had been visiting the couple for 9 months. During that time, he had never heard May utter a sound and only saw her eyes open once. Now, as Jansen continued taking care of these folks, he noticed that Buddy, the husband's depression, had lifted. Jansen wondered why and probed for an answer. Well, Buddy said, she was talking to the angels. Talking to the angels? Yeah, in her last hour, God let me know that. Buddy's reference to God didn't surprise Jansen. Buddy was a religious man who read the Bible and attended church. But then Buddy asked Jansen an unexpected question. Want to see what? There's a question mark at that end. Buddy walked into another room and returned with photos of his wife. He said he took them just before she died. Jansen was puzzled when he looked at the first photo of May. He saw her do something that seemed impossible. As he flipped through the photos of May's last moments, his confusion turned to astonishment. Floating toward a bright light at the end of the tunnel, a sudden feeling of bliss, a reunion with a long-lost loved one. These are the hallmarks of a near-death experience. People who survive such moments often describe them as spiritually transforming, something that inspires belief in God because of the afterlife. But what Jansen saw in these photos was another type of purported communication between the living and the dead. They were called end-of-life visions or deathbed visions. A deathbed vision is an experience in which a dying person, while awake, interacts with mysterious visitors, a deceased relative or spiritual figure. A person near death may ask cryptic questions like, who are those nice people who visited me last night? When there is no record of any hospital vision. And here I'm going to get to the point and then I'll stop. For people who are mentally ill, especially terminally ill, those deathbed visitations are messages from God. They reduce the fear of death and offer assurance that they won't be alone when they depart. So now we get into the question, and maybe this is what we'll talk about next time, because I have strong opinions on near-death experiences. I had one once, and it wasn't like the ones you see in the movies or read in a book. I was dead for 27 seconds. This is when my heart failed in November of 19. And my blood pressure was 260. My pulse had gone way, way down. And I was sweating profusely. And the doctor leaned over to me and said, we're giving you a couple of pikes in your arm, infusion. And if that doesn't work, we're going to have to shock you, because shocking sometimes will lead to, and then I was gone. They didn't shock me. I died. And I didn't see Grandma up in heaven with Jesus. I didn't see a strong light. I didn't really see anything. But I remember thinking one thing, and that was, what a great way to die. Boom, I'm just gone. Nobody's caring for me. Nobody had to do any of that. And then I decided to repent of some things. And I had repented on these things dozens of times. So why I chose to do that, I don't know. But I started to repent on something. And then this happened to me. I didn't hear God's voice. I didn't see bright lights. I didn't see a finger come out of the sky. But I felt God say to me in this tone, quit repenting. We've got work to do. And all of a sudden I was back. All the noise of the room, I was back. And the doctors had shocked me at that point. And I was back in the room. Now, interestingly enough, I didn't feel the shock. And the doctors always thought that was pretty weird, that I didn't feel the shock. My point was, God came and visited me as my body was dying and said, we've got work to do. That told me that I was doing God's will in my life. And it also told me that part of the work that I had to do was forgiveness. Because here my last things with God were a prayer for repentance of things I had done wrong. Am I forgiven, Stephen? Isn't that why Jesus died on the cross, so we would be forgiven?
Correct.
So next time when we do this show, and probably part 2 will come next week, we're going to continue this conversation about atheism and how it impacts us. And maybe we'll even talk a little bit about near-death experiences. We want to thank you for listening. We are Webcast One Live. This is The View from a Pew, and our worldwide sponsor is DivineTruthChristianStore.com. And we thank you for listening. We thank you for their sponsorship, and God bless you. Thanks for watching.